Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes before 8. More on your views from Afghanistan in a moment, but let's get the latest position from Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on the show. How many people do you understand? Good morning. How many people do you understand are still at risk in Afghanistan, but unfortunately we've not been able to assist with their evacuation? Good morning.
Good morning. Very difficult to give you a firm figure, but I can tell you that since April, 17,000 British nationals, Afghans who worked for us and other special cases have had safe passage out. The number evacuated is 15,000 since the middle of August on the charter flights. In terms of British nationals, the number is in the low hundreds. We've got 5,000 out, and most of the remaining cases are difficult, complex cases where individuals may be undocumented, they may be dual nationality, or they may be part of larger family unit where some are not eligible. Then there's the wider Arab cases, the Afghan workers. Again, we can't give a definitive number on that, mainly because, of course, that depends on their eligibility.
One newspaper today is reporting the figure to be around 7,000, and it also reported the cases of at least 5,000 at-risk people have been passed to your office, the Foreign Office.
Well, I don't recognise that figure, but of course we're processing all of the cases, and what we've done is airlift since April 17,000 out, and we're now focused on the safe passage, which until the airport in Kabul can be made functional again, will be via third countries. So we'll live up to all the commitments that we've made. I've spoken, and we've spoken in the Foreign Office, to all of the main third country which are likely to receive those cases, so we're ready and able to process them. And of course, you've seen overnight the UN Security Council resolution, which has doubled down the international community on holding the Taliban to their assurances that those wanting to leave, not just British nationals but vulnerable Afghans, will be allowed safe passage.
But you don't recognise that figure of 7,000 as it's reported?
I think and as I said, part of the issue has been that whilst we've got a lot that have reached out to us, that number has been magnified since the announcement of the resettlement scheme. So we'll include not just those that have worked for us, but others that are vulnerable. We'll need to go through and process all of those. We will do that. Of course, in the last few days of the evacuation, our focus was on getting as many bums on seats, if you like, the people that are eligible, whether they worked for us or whether they're British nationals or whether they're the vulnerable evening scholars, the journalists, the judges, the women's rights activists. We got over 250 of those out. We were making sure that we could get those onto those flights. But we will make sure for those that either haven't yet been processed and their eligibility not yet settled, or who have not been able to get to the airport and couldn't get on a flight, we'll make sure we go through those cases and live up to the undertakings that we've made.
Staying with some of the headlines, there's also a suggestion that the Abbey Gate, and I don't need to remind you of the horror that was wrought by the Abbey Gate was left open. That was a decision, it is claimed in Washington, that was taken by the US to assist British evacuation. Do you understand the US briefing to be correct?
I don't recognise it as accurate at all. But what I would say is that we coordinate very closely with the US, and we did in the context of the raised terrorist threat, including in the lead up to the attack we saw in Abbey Gate. We took every mitigating step that we could. We warned people not to come to the airport. We alerted people with the means that we had available in the crowd that were in contact with us to leave because of the risk. And we removed from the Barron's Hotel processing centre our civilian staff inside the airport, but that wouldn't have required leaving any gates open.
Two other matters. There seems to be concern over how much contact there was with other countries. How many calls did you make to Afghan or Pakistani foreign ministers in the 6 months prior to the Taliban gaining control of Afghanistan?
I don't have a precise figure, but what I'd tell you is
just roughly.
We have. I've been in regular contacts with Foreign Minister Qureshi. particularly around, of course, the evacuation. And that is one of the countries that we need to work with in terms of safe passage to third countries. But I just make this point, Nick. The suggestion that somehow calls were neglected is nonsense. We have a team, a division of Labour. So, for example, Lord Ahmed, Minister of State, so senior figure, held the relationship with the Afghan foreign minister. He knew him since before I was foreign secretary. That's a sensible thing to do. I was engaged in prioritising, in particular, as well as speaking to the Indians, the Pakistanis, the constant contact we were having with the Americans, with our NATO partners. We were talking and discussing it within the E3, France and Germany. We would get together as a quad with the Americans. These things happened both before and after the transition to the Biden administration. But it's absolutely right, given the volume of interlocutors we're reaching out to, that there was a team division of Labour. The idea that you don't delegate and we don't streamline and make sure we're covering all of the bases and focusing particularly on where the critical decisions were being made, which was within NATO and within the US, I'm afraid is out of touch with the reality of how you need to deal with a crisis like this.
To clarify, I'm not insinuating that anyone has been ignored here. I'm just picking up on a report that, in truth, 6 months prior to the fall, you made not a single call to the Afghan or Pakistani foreign ministers, but you can say that's candidly not true.
I'd need to check the call sheets. I don't wander around because I make so many calls all the time, and indeed we're in contact.
Something as key as this, Mr. Raab, you'd recall whether you phoned the Afghan foreign minister in 6 months.
Well, you're asking me over an entire 6-month period. So, but what I can tell you is that I've spoken to Foreign Minister Qureshi several times over the last.
No, it's a 6
weeks.
months prior, because a lot of people feel we might have been able to get more personnel out, possibly even more kit out for that matter, had we started a little earlier. So that's why I'm trying just to get a sense of how many calls went into Pakistan.
But that wouldn't. That is all predicated on how long the US and other NATO forces, including the UK, had in Afghanistan and in Kabul. And that's precisely why I was focused on working to press the... Hold on. So people understand, because the decision there was being taken in Washington and in Brussels with our NATO partners. And so my focus was on making sure we had the clearest time window to work to, as indeed were ministerial colleagues in the MOD. But of course, we were also engaged with all of the partners in the region. But at the time, of course, people weren't expecting such a rapid deterioration in the situation, because the best military assessment shared by all of our allies was that we would see a slow incremental deterioration from September.
I promise we'll move on. It's just, it seems strange that, given that you have the figures that we know that from April a total of 17,000 people were got out of the country, you have no recollection of whether or not in that period from April to August you phoned the Afghan foreign minister. But
I can't tell you my precise call sheet for the last 6 months.
I wonder if you made any calls. Is it fair for me to assert that?
No, I don't think it is. I'm
so
just telling you
calls.
that.
Okay.
I absolutely made a whole string of calls to the most critical interlocutors in terms of the decision that we were making, and of course, Nick. Sorry to emphasise the point. We are a team, and I've got a series of ministers, and it's absolutely right to delegate. While I focus on the top priority, which was making sure we understood with our NATO partners what the window for any evacuation would be.
You are a team, so how much was the team disadvantaged by the fact that Sir Philip Barton, the permanent Under-Secretary at the Foreign Office, one of its most senior officials, was also on his leave?
I don't think so, because you have an acting permanent representative, a permanent secretary in place, and the critical thing throughout all the period was that my Director General, Tom Drew, my Director for Afghanistan, Nigel Casey, were absolutely in full command, under my direction, working on the emergency crisis team in King Charles Street, which drew in not just the brilliant Foreign Office officials that we've got working on this, but also the MOD planners, the Home Office, Border Force and UK visa staff. And the truth is, it is right to have a situation, including in a crisis, where senior people can be, as well as more mid-ranking people, can be rotated. Otherwise, they burn out. So I've said in relation to my own holiday, with retrospect, with hindsight, which is, as we've discussed, you remember, the luxury of commentators, of course I wouldn't have gone away. But you have to rotate your teams, and that is particularly important if you're going to have the stamina to deal with a crisis.
But one key thing there there, and I wasn't going to revisit the holiday, but I will now ask you, is it true that you defied instructions to come back 2 days earlier?
No, all of that's nonsense, and I've answered questions now on that.
That's fine.
And,
So
and,
just
and,
lastly,
and the
would you
point
be able-
is, can I give you a proper answer?
Yes.
As a foreign secretary in the modern age, whether I'm away on holiday, which is very rare, or whether I'm travelling, because that's bread and butter of the job,
Yes.
I'm always equipped with the IT, with the rapid response to be able to deal with issues that come up. So the reality is we didn't skip a beat. And I think the evidence of that is from the point at which you're talking about through to the end of August, we got 15,000 people out. Pretty unprecedented. I think that shows we were on the job, we were gripping it, and it's a team effort with the MOD, with the Home Office, but no department did better than the Foreign Office in this critical stage.
What, not even the Ministry of Defence?
Look, I think the MOD did
The lads and
brilliantly.
girls who went over there and got all those... Gosh, that seems pretty brave to me.
Well, absolutely, and I've paid
Well, you
tribute
just
to
said
them.
nobody did more than the Foreign Office. I think possibly the Ministry of Defence would have a view.
Well, look, the troops on the ground did a heroic job. But if you're talking about the Whitehall teams that were standing up the evacuation in terms of the processing, and that's a combination of the MOD, the SCDO and the Home Office, I'm just saying it's a team effort, but the Foreign Office was leading and no department did better in terms of dealing with the very complex challenge that we all rose
And to put to bed finally this little issue over calls that were or not made. Presumably you have a log of calls, you and your colleagues, the Foreign Secretary when he calls the Pakistan, so you would eventually be able to produce a log that showed how many times you spoke with these key people.
Look, of course we've got the Foreign Office hold a diary, but the reality is...
So you can tell us how many times you phoned.
Well, the point I'm making to you is that Afghanistan was being dealt with in NATO, bilaterally with the US, with the Europeans, in a quad. Those were the priority areas I was focused on. Of course, as the crisis hotted up, I've been in regular contact with Qureshi, and indeed Foreign Minister Qureshi I was before that. But it's right that you have a delegation, a division of labour, if you're going to operate effectively as a team. Anyone that tells you otherwise has not done a job like this.
OK, lastly, on the subject of a team, you've probably seen this line already from the Sun newspaper. After the Afghan crisis, Dominic Raab has about as much chance of being in a top 4 position by next spring as Arsenal. Next spring, Mr. Raab, who will be higher up their respective league tables?
You'd be shocked to know that I don't give too much mind to the sort of backbiting, finger-pointing people, normally peripheral, who go and give anonymous quotes to newspapers during August. I've just been focused on this job, and we're now turning our attention to the next stage, the safe passage out for those that haven't yet made it out of Afghanistan, and the international approach embodied in the UN Security Council last night, something that we were driving forward.
You wouldn't want your career linked to Arsenal, I sense, Mr. Raab.
I'm a Chelsea fan, and we're doing just fine.
Well, you are doing considerably better than Arsenal, that's for sure, Mr. Raab. Thank you. Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary, appearing here on LBC. We're at 4 minutes after 8. The news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, America's 20-year military presence in Afghanistan